you want me to do it in French? Because I can do the whole thing in French.
It's like the worst episode of Long Lost Family you've ever seen in your life.
Yeah.
You're quite good at this, David. So do you feel you're getting I'm actually I'm getting a wee bit of a expert interviewer.
What you want to book for radio is good talkers, people who can talk, people who are relaxed.
Yeah. Diane, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, and what an intro.
Well, that's all right. We try. It's all true, and it's all true. I haven't made any of that up. I can make a bit of it if you want me to.
Where would I start? I love the way you said one or two things have been happening in the last year. I mean, it's been an absolute roller coaster.
I was doing so many technology stories, they decided to call me technology correspondent.
I am surrounded by Lego mechs, among other things, because my husband is in a meeting downstairs, and I think that he's decided his meeting is more important.
You with this guy in Greece, and he was Greek?
No, so he was actually Welsh.
Okay.
Yes.
I thought, well, if I write a book, then more people will hear about me and I'll be invited kindly on podcasts like this.
In today's episode of Insight from HReSource, we're going to be talking to somebody I've known for 15 or so years. Sarah Daniels is a health and safety consultant who owns and runs her own business, RedCat Partnership. Sarah is somebody who has very strong views on what we should be doing and lessons we should have learned from the COVID pandemic. And this is actually a podcast that grew out of comments that were made during our review of the HReSource survey. So we thought it was worth sharing the full conversation because there are some real insights that are worth hearing. Describes herself as supercharged, pragmatic risk management practitioner with big hair. She likes chocolate, she likes gin, likes cake. Who doesn't? But she laughs like a dragon. Now, I don't think there are many instances of that in this podcast, so we didn't have to break out the fire extinguishers. What I will say is it's definitely one worth watching and hearing. So we've got the YouTube channel for you. We've also got our normal podcast format. So no more from me. Let's get straight on with it and let's listen to Sarah. So Sarah, delighted to have you come and share your views on the HReSource survey. But the first thing I've got to say is the way you describe yourself on your website is fabulous, because I've known you, and we were just talking about this, more years than we care to remember. But the way you describe yourself is perfect, because you say that you laugh like, or somebody says you laugh like a dragon. Mm-hmm. Now, you work in risk health and safety, risk management. If somebody
I'm trying not to laugh like a dragon now, because it does boom out.
If somebody tells you a really funny joke, do you have to sort of get a fire extinguisher out or something?
Yeah, could do. Just go chortle quietly to myself.
But you run a successful partnership, RedCat partnership as a health and safety consultancy. So you're going to have an interesting perspective in terms of and we'll touch on the risk bit right at the end. Okay. But first and foremost, I mean, we would just touching on this, Pete, workload and coming through the pandemic and decide how have things been for you?
We had to manage our workload really quite carefully. And it's really quite difficult thinking back to those early times. And I'm actually sat in the room where I had quite a lot of difficult conversations at the beginning of COVID. And there's a writing wall the other side of the room. And literally, I'd probably turn the screen round and I'd start writing, because that's me. I'm much more flowery and flouncy, and I can't sit still, and I use my hands a lot. But workload, there was a couple of weeks where I don't think anybody really knew what was going to happen. And when you look back on that, you think we should have been able to see the wood from the trees. We should have been able to do it, but we didn't. And I think that was very much led or unled by the government. Sorry, that's going to be a very political statement.
No, I completely agree with you. But
on reflection, I think they have damaged some people's perception of risk.
Yeah.
And it's caused a chasm in the middle. But getting back to your question, because I'm jumping ahead, workload, at the beginning, we felt like we had to do so much just to keep our heads above water.
Yeah.
And we're only a small consultancy. There's only 4 of us. And it's 4 of us that really matter, because we all have our own families and our own expenses and whatever. But for us, it really showed that we could manage risk properly.
Yeah.
And it gave us an absolute trust with our clients. Our clients were asking us, in some respects, in their heads, life or death questions. Can we do that or can we not do that? Because at some points, the government was saying, we're all going to die. And it was a difficult one to wade through the morass of information that was out there. And I still remember some days just literally scrolling through documents and Twitter and other social media channels and doctors' reports and all sorts to actually really get to the nuts and bolts. What does COVID really mean for the man or woman on the Clapham Omnibus, our clients? How do we need to protect ourselves as a start? So workload massively peaked and then pushed along really quite nicely, but at a reasonably high level. Because there were some days I was on version 3 or 4 of a client's risk assessment. The government was changing their guidelines. And I think I developed a bit of a love-hate relationship with Chris Whitty, but he was a joy. I think he still will stand on my pedestal as the good guy from COVID.
A voice of reason and sense. You know?
Yes, absolutely. And it's almost, what would Chris Whitty do now? What would I do if your staff were my staff? I'd say to clients, we don't know everything, but what we could do was put a really good, educated, pragmatic take on what was going on. So workload was tough. And I used to have the odd moment that I'd get really grumpy with people that are on furlough, because I didn't have the luxury of being able to sit in my garden and drink gin and eat chocolate. It literally was, we were for periods of time, 7 days a week. But the business has come out stronger, more respected and more trusted, because we really, our sensibleness, if that's a word, came to the fore.
I mean, the reality is people had to lean on those organizations outside of the government because it couldn't be trusted with its communications. I mean, going right back to the beginning, and I am no guru or I don't have a magic globe that'll tell me what's going to happen in the future. None of that. No horoscope reader. But I've been reading the news, and I put a blog out on LinkedIn in the January 2020 talking about the pandemic. You would have been the same. You were watching the news reports, watching the World Health Organization making their statements. This thing was on its way.
Yeah, we knew it was on its way. I've got clients in China. We knew very early on. There was a very strange conversation about oxygen disinfection very early on in January 2020. And so you started that research, and that's why it was good. We were almost slightly ahead of it, but it was still very, very scary for a lot of people. And it still is. The knock-on effect, and I know that's what some of your survey has brought through. I don't think people will, it sounds really dramatic, but I don't think people will ever be the same again.
No, I mean,
from a work point of view, you know, I'm like you, we're wise with our years. I've earned all of these wrinkles and all of this grey hair. And it really has changed.
You've got hair, that's one thing.
Well, sorry, I've got hair for everybody. But it is just retirement for some came early, and they've just never gone back to work. And I know other business owners that went, I'm glad I'm in my early 60s because I've just brought my retirement forward. I've just enough now. I'm not sure I can start again. And I'm thinking, oh my, but some of us have to. Some of us have got another 10 years. Absolutely. We've got to keep going.
Yeah. And some of us just love doing what we do anyway. You know, exactly. I can't imagine doing anything other than being busy with something, whether it's I'm hosting podcasts or doing strategic work with people or just meeting people and engaging with people and being involved. And that's something obviously that.
And I think that's what COVID really highlighted, the differences in us all. There was not one size fits all, and the authorities tried to make people the average, but we're not average. There were some people that were far more at risk.
Yeah.
Some people that had a very different risk perception and would do nothing to protect themselves and put other employees in danger. Yeah. It was an interesting set of conversations about people's perceptions. Yeah. And many a conversation, it was arguing and backing it up with absolutely reliable sources.
It's interesting what you said about the way that the pandemic highlighted how people were in terms of their personality. Their true personalities were coming out, how they react to a crisis, which we were in the middle of a crisis or emerging crisis. On one of my very, very early podcasts, I was fortunate enough to have a qualified psychotherapist who also happens to be known to quite a few people because it's Diane Newdale, who was Jet in Gladiator. So she, just drop that one in there. But she's brilliant. She's absolutely brilliant. Lives just up the road. Well, her mother lives just up the road from where we live. And she said exactly the point about, what you do. And she explained about her situation, and she immediately sort of had to think about her mother who was vulnerable and had to, basically lock down with her. And with our situation, which was slightly different, I just couldn't bear the sort of four walls. So I joined the NHS responders, not because I'm particularly altruistic, it's because I had to get out and do something, being brutally honest. I mean, it was good that I was doing something worthwhile as well, but the main driver for me, if I'm being perfectly honest, was doing something, being busy.
Routine. We needed routine.
Not being in my head.
Yeah, we'd walk down to the office every day because it was a doing something. And it was... We still can work better from the office rather than from at home. Even though there's a home office there, we much prefer to keep home and work separate. And that's a whole other interesting ball game, this new hybrid style of working. So loads to talk about, really, if we wanted to.
No, we're going to do that. Looking at the survey and specifically some of the questions on there, employment law must feature quite strongly in terms of the remit of areas of legislation that you will consider when you're looking at your own particular area. What would you say, looking at the current statute and looking at the way in which we're managing employment law in this country, what would you, if you were given an opportunity and you're introduced into the government to do this wonderful job and they'd actually listen to you, and pay attention to your advice, what area of law would you focus on to change and to improve or introduce?
I'm going to flip it into health and safety management, because that's obviously, just to be cheeky, but it does, health and safety and employment law, jigsaws itself into themselves. So I think I would like to look at the competency of the people that are in charge. I would like there to be some set of parameters and a greater liability. So the buck just stops with you. Because at the moment, it's all a bit whiffly waffly, isn't it?
Yeah. Accountability.
Accountability, that's a very good, sensible word, isn't it? Accountability.
There's not much of that going around in certain areas. I think that focus on that wouldn't do any harm.
And I don't know particularly which piece of law that would fit into, but in my world, it would fit into the Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act. It's a fantastic piece of legislation written in 1973, but it still covered the pandemic perfectly. But I think the accountability, someone just needs to have the competency. And I think with competency, we need to get away from training. It's not just training, it's attitude. And it's how you put your training or your knowledge into being. So just not a tick box. I've got this qualification, therefore I can manage. It's I've got this, but I've also got this experience or this is my take on the world. And we talked earlier about some people new people coming in with very different mindsets. And I think there needs to be a lot more about accountability, especially when we're talking about fluffy well-being policies as well. It's not just a bowl of fruit on reception. It's far more than that. And I see well-being as the new word for welfare in health and safety law. So it should be health, safety, and well-being.
That's a really good point. I do like that. I do like that because it ties that all nicely together. And I do think there is an element of, for certain employers, not the majority, but for certain employers, the well-being piece is a tick box exercise where
we've got the fruit, we've got the
the benefits package that is something they've bought off the shelf and said, well, we've now got additional benefits for you. You can go to the gym if you want, or you can cycle to work. We'll put a bike park up for you. Or
but I was with a client recently that were waxing lyrical about their EAP. So I thought, well, I'm going to go and have a look, see what it's like, and see whether I can get onto the website. And it was atrocious. Absolutely a load of bunkum. There was nothing to signpost me to anything or anything. And then I got a message. I went into the chat and it went, "We're closed." Okay. And I thought, what if I'm really struggling? You can't have something that is not open when people want it. And we talk about, we asked, the first question was about workload. If you're struggling, you want somebody to help you there and then, to signpost you to something.
You absolutely do.
And I thought, you're singing about this EAP, but you need something that's much more bespoke to your industry rather than an off the shelf. And that's why I think with accountability, the new HR director had just brought what they had from another company. It did not fit. So back to management, it's got to fit. You've got to have the right attitude to go, this is what's going to work for my team, my premises, my processes, whatever it is, and pull that all together. I'm having a Venn diagram moment in my head now.
No, I'm getting it. So I think it's really good. And one point you've made there, which I'd connect with as well, is about employees. And there has been some research about recruitment that has taken place during the sort of pandemic and post-pandemic, where employers are now finding that they made hasty decisions or decisions on recruiting because people weren't always around, that they wanted the right skill sets, the right experience, but they made the best choice they could. And one of the downsides of that is if those positions are quite senior, they've made some fairly fundamental decisions. And maybe one of the shortcut elements of somebody coming into a role that might feel a little bit sort of fish out of water is they bring what they know. Yeah. So they'll bring, ideas, and some of them might be good, but even if you're in the same sector and you've got the job because you've worked in a similar sector, it isn't always going to work.
Culture is so different, isn't it? Yeah. So very, very different. And yet, like you can have it on the face of it, 2-3 very similar businesses, but the culture is very different. And I think one of the other things we're seeing a lot of amalgamation of companies. So companies seem to be getting bigger, and we're losing that bespoke element, that face-to-face element. And that's why I think management is what I'd change if I had my magic wand.
Well, I think after that response, I think they need to the call needs to be coming in anytime soon from Rishi. We're looking at the priorities for people within HR specifically. What do you think? I think it moves straight into this one now, but in terms of the priorities for HR, when we looked at the survey, the results that came through, we've already mentioned the well-being piece. Yeah. That was unsurprisingly top of the shop. Would you agree with that, or do you have any other areas that you think would be, well, actually that's all well and good, but actually this is more important?
I think well-being is the umbrella that everything can fit under, because if your staff, your team are happy, and I say happy and feel successful because whatever that is means different things for different people, everything else will flow. Yeah. If you've got unhappy, uneasy, unfulfilled, unsatisfied team members, you've not got a business. Full stop.
Yeah. It's about the understanding what they've got to do to make a difference in the business.
And their role within the business, what a crucial cog they are in the whole wheel of what's going on. I think sometimes people can they lack that communication with the key people. People are not present anymore.
And it raises another one of these issues about the hybrid working situation.
Yeah.
And increasingly a view that people are not wanting to work necessarily in the same location as everybody else in an office. They'd rather work from home because they've had the experience of working from home and quite like it. And I get that. I'm somebody who has been working from home for over 20 years. So
I started the business working from home because it was the flexibility that it gave me to bring up my daughter.
Yeah. I mean,
and at that time, I was a complete night owl as well. So I worked when it suited me and was a mum when it suited me. And I think we need to get away from the 9 to 5. But my fear is we're going back to 9 to 5. That average person again. We don't do that. Nobody does it. But I think there is still this old school thought that you have to fit this box. But I think COVID, the pandemic, whatever we want to call it, enabled the box to flex slightly. But I think some people's management style means that box is being tried to be squeezed back to what they're used to and what they find happiest managing. But I do think well-being is not going to go away in any way, shape or form. It really is the priority for everybody. You've got to have a happy workforce. And what does happy mean for people? Happy for me on how I measure success is very different to you, very different to the next person. But it's understanding your people, isn't it? What makes them tick? And not having a piece of software that just goes, well, you had 10 minutes extra break. Well, yeah, that's because I needed to do something, which meant I was then more focused when I came back.
And it's the outcomes, as in ultimately if the job's being done and it's being done well, how you've arrived at that point, whether you're actually, in the office doing the hours or appearing to do over the hours, that's one thing. I think it's about the output. One of the issues that I know is being faced by a lot of people who run businesses is things around flexible working and the move by the government, and they're talking about bringing in from day one rather than after the 26-week period, now being able to decide, right, you've got a new employee and immediately asking for flexible working. I think it's about the determination of what flexible working, how flexible working can work for an organization that is, and providing the scope so that everybody's aware. Flexible working is, if your job role allows a certain scope and flexibility around home working and or hours and or holidays, whatever it might be, there's a package. And I think there is a situation where some employers are being faced with situations where they're being asked for an awful lot more than that because an employee believes now it's open season. I can have
their expectation is very, very different, isn't it? And that's why I mentioned communication earlier. It is about making sure people are aware of the boundaries.
Yeah.
So I like the idea of annualized hours or even hours over a week or a month, whatever suits, because then actually people can do the work.
Yeah.
But they need to understand, and this goes back to stress and well-being, that there will be peaks of workload and we will need you in at that time. When I say in, I mean at work, wherever that is. But if you don't have that conversation, the expectations are all over the place, aren't they? And that's when you get the conflict. But I think people are still frightened of having the conversations. And I wax lyrical about starting a business when I had a 2-year-old, and now in the crazy menopause years, we've got to have a different level of flexibility.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
I'll get the crazy menopause years into this conversation as well. I'll beat the drum.
I think most men have been completely and utterly oblivious because women have just got on with it.
Yeah, because we've had to. But I mean, we were the first generation that talked about our periods. We're now the first generation that are going, no, we're going to talk about our menopause as well and the crap we have to put up with.
I'm pretty sure if men have had to put up with the menopause, and there are arguments about men do have a variation of it, but nothing like obviously what women go through. But if men suffered from the same symptoms, then you could be damn sure. There would have been national holidays for menopause happening and all sorts of provisions put in place. And yeah, I'm a firm believer of that one. Looking at for the priorities you're seeing, it is the well-being piece, but it's expanded upon and it's looked about as in the whole, as opposed to being a tick box exercise. It needs to be properly thought.
It's not a bowl of fruit.
Absolutely, yeah.
I use that as an analogy because some people, oh yeah, we have fruit delivered every week. I'm going, yeah, and what else?
Yeah, and it's conversations as well, understanding what.
And I think, sorry, I've just jumped in there, and I think that probably what's needed is some benchmarking, isn't it? These are some good things to do, because back to the conversation piece, and the pandemic allowed us to be far more honest with other business owners and business managers about what we were going through. What have you done about this? What are you doing? What do you find that's worked? It's that sharing. And I'm hoping, and in my sphere of business owners locally, we are still having some very rough and tough conversations, but we didn't before COVID so much. Yeah. It's enabled us to share more, I think, because it was the common crisis, even though we all had a different perception and different take on it. The need to talk more, communicate more in whatever form that is, needs to stay.
Yeah.
But you can't, it's very difficult to legislate. You must talk to your staff. We've had that in for years because of trade unions and then the communication regs, but it's more than just being forced to do it. It's doing it because your culture wants you to know about what's going on in your team's world.
Let's face it, being an HR manager, an HR director, it's not an easy job.
No.
And I think it's been a particularly tough job given the period that we've been through. I think my take on it is, and sort of just picking up on the trends and the awareness that we've had. We talked about the pandemic, which is a virus, but the other version of something that's sweeping across in terms of our health is our mental health.
Yeah.
And I can't, if you only have to scroll through LinkedIn for a little while to discover that somebody has just discovered actually, oh, all along I've had ADHD, or some other neurodiverse. I'm not belittling that at all. That is incredible to have a diagnosis, no matter where you are in your career or your lifestyle. But people are becoming more aware of those issues in their sort of personal makeup.
I just think we need to be happy with being ourselves. We shouldn't try and fit a box. And that's easy for me to say because I had the ability to jump ship, run my own business, do it as I wanted to do. But we should all just be ourselves. I don't want a box that says, I'm neurodiverse. I'm just Sarah. Yeah. And my experiences and my knowledge are still making me Sarah. Yeah.
But also when you're in a situation, I think as maybe a more junior member of a team, and somebody is being a bit sort of, autocratic or being a typical sort of like thumping a table and wanting something done. I think maybe that's one output of an awareness of mental health now, is we need to be a little bit more understanding without being, I know there's people listening to this are probably thinking, but then ultimately we need to get a job done. I think we need to be able to understand everybody is different. Everybody has different.
But in risk assessment terms, bringing it back to my expertise, risk assessment terms, the risk assessment wouldn't be suitable and sufficient if we didn't consider the human factors and how somebody is going to act, react, what their needs. So I think in my world, we should consider people as individuals, not as this bulk of people or people with ADHD do this. No, they don't. They are all so very different. And that's what worries me about labels and boxes. Still within that, you've got so much diversity. we're going back to a ticker box. I've got a member of team who's ADHD. I need to do X. No, you need to talk to that person and find out how they want to do that particular task, as an example.
Yeah, it's as I see it, it's a spectrum, but it's a movable spectrum.
Absolutely.
Forever shifting.
I see it like bubbles coming out of one of those blowy things. Bing, 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 bing. There you go. Yeah. That's my world. And it's how our bubbles interact with each other.
That's a very good analogy. I like that. I mean, in terms of the challenges now, looking forward, projecting forward in your role and about maybe risk and thinking about other areas of HR, what do you think are going to be the greatest challenges over the next sort of year or two?
Oh, that's a really tough question, isn't it?
I like it.
Yes, I know you like it. Tough question. Making it I think keeping everybody happy, trying to get people off social media and listening to the dreadful stuff that's out there. I think holistically,
how do you get people off social media? So you're going in to see a client and they're saying, we've got this real problem, quite a diverse workforce, but most of them have a common problem. They're all on the smartphones all day.
Yeah, but some people, that's how they learn. Some people, that's where they see where their instructions are. They need to have them individual to themselves. So it's, as I said earlier, and it's about their boundaries. What use is acceptable? Because you've got somebody that's got a home issue, they're going to want to be on their phone. They're going to want to know. And if they can't have their partner or whoever getting in touch with them, that's going to cause them more of an issue. But it's setting those boundaries. Yeah. And it may be that actually increased use is okay while you're going through this, but then we need to go back to that. And it's back to outputs. If you can get the work done to a standard that we need, then actually it doesn't matter.
So you're getting it, yeah.
Yeah, that's really quite a straightforward answer. I know there's some fluffiness around the edges of it, but it's about people understanding the implications of them doing what they're doing.
Great answer, actually. Because it is about, I mean, you I think you nailed it in talking about being happy, and ultimately,
happiness means different things.
Of course it does, and I think what it means for anybody who's running an organisation is not to go around with a clown suit on trying to make everybody laugh. Nope. It is about ensuring that people feel fulfilled in their jobs. Mm-hmm. They understand what it is they've got to do, and they also understand the guidelines, as in the boundaries that you've referenced, because if we know that, then we should be able to function. And if somebody falls outside of the rails on that, there needs to be a conversation, because
I think that goes back to a job description or an advert or the interview, the first few weeks of induction. Yeah. We've got to get our foundations right, haven't we? And I think that's possibly gone for some organisations a bit awry.
Mentoring also featured quite strongly as one of the positive outputs in business. And I've been a huge advocate of mentoring for over 20 years and involved in mentoring and still actively mentor. And equally, I now see the relationships I've had with my mentees. It's a two-way street. And I've made it very open to them. I've got some fabulously bright, far cleverer than me, young people who are having stellar moments in their careers, which is lovely to see. But I'm equally learning from them. And we shouldn't be afraid, because we've been running businesses for quite some time or been involved in senior roles in businesses for quite some time. We don't know it all. No. You know, I
have a great phrase with my daughter. She's now 26. I'll go, we need to adult now. Can we have an adult conversation? And it just means that I need her perspective as well on something. Yeah,
I don't have to ask. I get that. All three of mine in their 20s will be quite willing to give me their feedback, whether I want it or not.
Exactly, but it is giving people permission, isn't it?
Yes. And they do. I mean, I am super impressed by my three, because of the way they're very different, but they've equally got the capability of navigating their way through a life at the moment, which seems ever more complex and scary. And that's, to me, a lot of people at the moment, and the difficulties in work is a failure to find a resilience in their own life. Because one of the things I always used to come back to when I was running a law firm a few years back was that if there was a problem that somebody was facing, don't go at it from head on. There's always it's the backstory. Yeah. It's the context of somebody's behavior. You know, if you think, oh, somebody's off sick, they're constantly off sick, right? We're gonna take them through the grievance process now. We'll deal with it. Hang on a minute. Why?
Yeah, I was about to say my favorite question is why. And it's often the fifth or sixth why in that sequence that you get to where the right answer is.
Just one final piece on this.
Okay.
It's been fabulous. And this is going to be a podcast in its own right. So now I'm now telling you that, which is going to be great. The point on risk for you, because that's your raison d'etre, that's your business, what it's all about. We've come through the issues with the pandemic, through COVID, and what are you seeing right now, as you think as a result of our life experience over the last 3 years in business? Are there any areas of business which are actually, you think, far riskier, or there's greater danger being or more risks being taken?
I think people's perception of risk has changed. I think people's financial risk has changed, and that has an impact on their attitude. They may want to do 2 or 3 jobs or work extra hours because they're fearful of losing everything. I'm seeing a chasm. You know, some people are much more sensible with their risk management, and others are going to an extreme. So we just can't do that anymore. Well, yes, you can. We just need to think about it a little bit. And I think it's pulling everybody's expectations together and facing next year, the year after, but with openness and honesty. I think the cost of living crisis is an interesting conversation at the moment. Some people just are not getting it. Some people don't understand what other folks have to deal with. Yeah. If you're worried about money, that takes over every single minute of your day. What can I have? What can I have to eat? Can I pay this bill? You're constantly juggling. And if you haven't got a mortgage and you've got loads of money, you don't even think about whether you can buy something. And I think this chasm of, I could sound like I'm on my socialist ranty box now, but between the rich and the poor. And I think we've got to do something much more about pulling that together.
I completely agree, and I think, and I was talking to a good friend of mine recently, who travelled to another part of the north of the country, their hometown, and realised that while there were some developments and investments going in certain parts of that town, which made it look good, you know, a couple of steps outside of that area, and was an absolute horror show, with care provision, GP surgeries being understaffed, under-resourced, people having to wait months to be able to get appointments. You know, all of that is the infrastructure of the country that is not being seen by people who live in ivory towers, I'm afraid. So I'm joining you on the socialist soapbox. But
start me on Margaret Thatcher.
What I say, but I'm apolitical. I don't follow a colour. I don't follow a particular.
We know right from wrong, don't we? And we know empathy. I think there's a lack of empathy with some people in ivory towers. And it's like that comment, just work harder, longer. No. Yeah. That's not going to solve it.
And also a perception that anybody that might want to object is doing so for reasons other than the basic one that you just talked about: living, getting food. Yeah. It's tough out there, and I think as risks go, I think businesses need to take some consideration as to that what's going on in their workforce, and you know, how people are actually coping. It doesn't mean to say they can all afford to be able to pay people bigger salaries. That's not the answer, but actually being mindful of the struggle.
Of what's going on in their world. If they're worried about their finances, they're not going to drive correctly, appropriately, as I had the other day with an incident. But that's where you get the whys, and that's where you get somebody who's independent and who is tenacious, keep going, why? And we have to have the difficult conversation so you understand more about what's going on in somebody's mindset.
Sarah, could you do me a favour? We've drawn to the end of the discussion about the survey that we were touching on risk, and it's been great to catch up with you. What I would like to share with the audience is an understanding of how they might be able to get hold of you if they find they're in need of some health and safety advice.
Oh, lovely. I wasn't expecting that at all. So we're called the RedCat Partnership Limited. We have a website which is www.redcat, REDCAT partnership.co.uk. So just find us there, send us a message, or if you want to find me on any social media, I am at RedCat Sarah. There you go.
Sarah, it's been an absolute delight to catch up with you. Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye-bye.